The day the acceptance letter from Ethelgard University arrived, a crisp envelope holding my future, my cousin Clara knelt on the floor in front of me, clutching her stomach and sobbing that she was pregnant with my boyfriend Leo's child. She begged me, with tears streaking her perfectly made-up face, to let them be together. I laughed. I laughed so hard my jaw ached and my vision blurred. It wasn't hysteria. It was pure, unadulterated relief. I had been racking my brain for weeks, trying to find a graceful way to sever the childhood engagement that felt more like a shackle with each passing day. And now, the perfect excuse had delivered itself to my doorstep, wrapped in faux vulnerability and a cheap floral dress. Graduating from a top-tier university, inheriting my mother's vast business empire, becoming a billionaire in my own right. Wasn't that a future worth embracing? Men, I had decided, only complicated the simple, beautiful equation of ambition and success. In my previous life, I learned that lesson the hard way, dying alone and exhausted on a factory floor, my potential squandered for a man who wasn't worth the dirt on my shoes. But I was given a second chance. The moment I opened my eyes to this reborn life, I found myself staring into Clara's wide, pitiful eyes. She was standing at our front door, a large, worn suitcase beside her, draped in a plain white dress that was supposed to signal innocence but only screamed calculation. It was about a month before the college entrance exams. As a junior at my high school, she had used the excuse that our house was closer to the campus to convince my father to let her move in. "Clara, why didn't you call me first? I would have picked you up," my father David said, his voice dripping with a concern he rarely reserved for me. He pushed me aside without a second glance, his bulk a wall of misplaced paternal instinct as he ushered her in. "You must be exhausted from the journey." I rubbed my arm where he had shoved me, the phantom sting of a past life's slap echoing in the memory. What had I done back then? The painful recollection flooded me. Furious and proud, I had refused to give up my room. I had screamed at my father, called Clara a leech, and in return he had backhanded me across the face. The sound had brought my mother running, and their already fractured marriage had developed another deep, irreparable crack. But that was only the beginning. In that other life, Clara and Leo had grown closer under my own roof, their whispered conversations and accidental touches chipping away at my sanity. Instead of focusing on my studies, my world had shrunk to the confines of our house, a battlefield where I wasted my energy trying to drive Clara out and tear her away from Leo. A straight-A student, a girl who had collected academic awards like others collected trinkets, I failed my exams so spectacularly that I barely scraped into a bottom-tier community college. Later, my parents finally divorced. I stayed with my father, a decision I would curse until my dying day. Clara framed me for pushing her down the stairs, a lie my father eagerly believed, and he threw me out. He gave her a multi-million-dollar dowry, a final twist of the knife, and she married Leo. Their union was hailed as a perfect match. Meanwhile, I drifted through a series of dead-end jobs before ending up in a factory, my body giving out one night amidst the relentless hum of machinery, my spirit broken long before my heart stopped. Now reborn and painfully wise, I took a different path. "The attic is free," I said, my voice calm and clear, cutting through my father's fawning. Both he and Clara turned to stare at me. "It's quiet up there. It would be perfect for Clara to study and for me too with my exams coming up. I'll move my things there today." My father's expression shifted from surprise to approval. "See, Clara? Your cousin is so thoughtful." Clara's smile was tight, her eyes confused. She had been prepared for a fight, for tears, for a drama she could use to paint herself as the victim. My acquiescence had thrown her off balance. I didn't do it out of kindness or fear. I did it for the silence. The attic was a world away from the rest of the house. It was there, surrounded by dusty boxes and the faint scent of old wood, that I rebuilt myself. While Clara practiced her domestic charms downstairs, cooking breakfasts my father praised to the heavens, I buried myself in textbooks. The ghost of my past failure was a relentless motivator. I studied until my eyes burned and my fingers were stained with ink. I saw them together sometimes, Leo with his charming empty smile and Clara hanging on his every word. In my first life, the sight would have sent me into a rage. Now I felt nothing but a cold, detached amusement. I pretended not to notice their lingering touches, their whispered conversations that stopped the moment I entered a room. Let them have their little game. I was playing a much larger one. The exams came and went. When the results were published, my name was at the very top. Ethelgard University and its rival Northwood University fought over me with scholarship offers. The choice was simple. Ethelgard was the key to the future I had been denied. When the thick, embossed acceptance letter finally arrived, I allowed myself a single deep breath of triumph. I opened the attic window, the summer air warm on my face, and let out a long, steadying exhale. The first part of my plan was complete. I had secured my escape route. Now it was time to settle accounts. I came downstairs to find Clara leaning against Leo in the living room, her body language a clear claim of territory. The moment he saw me, Leo quickly pushed her away and strode over, a practiced, guilty smile on his face. "Lila, you finally decided to join the land of the living," he said, reaching for my hand. "You've been so buried in your books you've forgotten all about me. You'll have to make it up to me now." I stepped back, evading his touch. "From where I'm standing, it looks like you already have company." I let my gaze drift meaningfully to Clara. Leo had the decency to look uncomfortable for a split second before his mask of nonchalance slid back into place. "Lila, don't be ridiculous. I'm only nice to Clara because she's your cousin. Don't make it into something it's not." His words were cold, dismissive. I saw Clara's face pale at his casual rejection, and I had to fight the urge to smirk. Leo and I had been engaged since we were children, a business arrangement masquerading as a romance orchestrated by our families. In my first life I had believed the fairy tale, seeing him as my destined husband. Losing him to Clara had felt like a fundamental part of my identity had been stolen. Now I saw him for what he was, a vain, weak-minded boy playing at being a man. Perhaps because I wasn't feeding their drama with my own jealousy, their relationship hadn't blossomed into the grand passion it once was. Leo was still content to have us both, me as his respectable, academically blessed fiancé, and Clara as his secret, thrilling distraction. The sheer disgust of it solidified my resolve. How could I get rid of him quickly? An idea, deliciously cruel in its simplicity, formed in my mind. I looked at him, allowing a soft, lovesick expression to cross my face, a performance worthy of an award. "Since I'm going to be your wife someday anyway," I said, my voice sweet and hopeful, "why don't we just get married now? Before I leave for Ethelgard." "Married?" Clara was the one who shrieked the word, her composure shattering. I turned my wide, innocent eyes on her. "Why, cousin? Don't you think it's a good idea? Or, do you want to marry Leo in my place?" The direct hit made her flinch as if I'd struck her. Her lips trembled, but no sound came out. Leo's face was a comical mask of panic. He was clearly not done enjoying the spoils of his two-faced courtship. I decided to pour gasoline on the flickering flames of his ambition. "Leo, I got into Ethelgard. Can you imagine? When your mother hears, she'll be so happy for us." His eyes lit up like I'd offered him a winning lottery ticket. The Hayes family had money, old money from manufacturing, but what they lacked was social credibility. They were the new rich, a label Leo's mother, Eleanor, despised. I was her trophy, my academic prowess the polish for their family's tarnished reputation. "You got into Ethelgard?" he breathed, his previous unease forgotten. "For real?" When I nodded, his excitement was palpable. "Just wait here. Don't move. I'm going to tell my parents right now. They're going to be so thrilled." He practically ran out the door, leaving Clara and me alone in the suddenly tense silence. As soon as the door clicked shut, her mask of wounded innocence crumbled into sheer desperation. She clutched her still flat stomach, her knees buckling as she dropped to the floor before me. "Lila, I'm so sorry," she sobbed, real tears this time born of terror. "I'm carrying Leo's child." I looked down at her, my expression unchanging. "I know." Her tears stopped instantly, frozen by shock. How could you know?" I only smiled a cold, enigmatic smile and turned to walk back upstairs. "Get some rest, Clara. You look pale. This afternoon is going to be very eventful." I needed to conserve my energy. The show was just beginning. The sharp, insistent banging on my attic door jerked me from a light, strategic sleep. My father's voice, thick with irritation, followed. "Lila, you lock yourself in there all day, either studying or sleeping. I feed you like I'm fattening a prize pig, and this is the thanks I get? Why can't you be more like your cousin? She's up at dawn making herself useful." I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my body moving with a calm purpose that belied the storm I was about to unleash. I opened the door, my face a blank slate. My father, David, stood there, his fist raised to knock again. My utter lack of expression, no anger, no fear, no apology, seemed to infuriate him more than any defiance could have. "You ungrateful brat," he snarled, his face mottling with rage. "How dare you look at your father with those dead eyes?" His hand, large and calloused, swung toward my face. But I was ready. I had replayed this moment in my mind 100 times. I ducked smoothly under the arc of his blow and darted past him, taking the stairs 2 at a time, leaving his strike to connect with nothing but air. The sound of his frustrated roar faded behind me as I reached the bottom of the staircase. The scene in the living room was exactly as I had anticipated. Leo was there, flanked by his parents, Charles and Eleanor Hayes. They were seated on our finest sofa, chatting with a forced joviality that couldn't mask their underlying avarice. Clara was playing the part of the dutiful hostess to perfection, pouring tea with a demure smile, though her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy. Clearly, the news of her pregnancy had not yet been delivered to the Hayes family. So she lacked the courage to make her move. I would have to give her a push. "Hello, Uncle Charles, Aunt Eleanor," I greeted them, my voice pleasant as I walked into the room. I made sure to hold the Ethelgard University acceptance letter prominently in my hand. Eleanor Hayes's eyes, sharp and assessing, immediately latched onto the envelope. She rose, her smile widening into something genuinely covetous, and plucked the letter from my grasp. "Ethelgard. Oh, Charles, look," she trilled, scanning the contents before passing it to her husband. She then seized my hands, her grip surprisingly strong. "Lila, my dear, our family is so incredibly proud. You are such a credit to us all." Just then my father stomped down the stairs, his face still dark with anger. But at the sight of the Hayeses, he forced his features into a semblance of geniality. Eleanor, seeing her chance, turned to him. "David, Leo is already 21 and Lila is a young woman now. With her heading off to university soon, why don't we hold the wedding first? They can take care of the legal formalities later. What do you say?" The Hayes family's financial clout far outstripped my father's. He was a man who measured worth in bank balances and social connections. Hearing Eleanor's proposal, his irritation with me vanished, replaced by obsequious enthusiasm. "Of course, Eleanor. A wonderful idea. What date did you have in mind?" I watched them, my father and Leo's parents, eagerly bartering my future as if my mother, the true architect of our family's stability, didn't even exist. She was still at the office, managing the corporation that funded my father's comfortable life. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. My gaze drifted to Clara. She was staring at Leo, her eyes pleading, trying to silently communicate her distress. But Leo, ever the coward, was studiously avoiding her gaze, sitting stiffly and pretending not to notice the silent screams emanating from the woman carrying his child. When faced with the full weight of his family's expectations, his love for Clara proved to be a flimsy, hollow thing. "How about next month, before Lila's semester begins?" Charles Hayes suggested. "An excellent plan," my father agreed heartily. The 3 of them nodded, a transaction completed. That was my cue. "Uncle Charles, Aunt Eleanor," I began, my voice soft and laced with a tremor I expertly manufactured. "I truly do want to marry Leo." I let my eyes well up with tears I'd conjured using a drop of saline solution moments earlier. I turned my wounded gaze toward Clara. "But, my cousin, she seduced him. And now she's carrying his child." The room went utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop in the plush carpet. Charles Hayes was the first to find his voice. "Lila, that's a very serious accusation. Your cousin? You must be mistaken." "I wish I were mistaken," I whispered, letting a single perfect tear trace a path down my cheek. I bowed my head, my shoulders shaking with feigned sobs, but I watched them all through my lashes. But she admitted it to me herself not an hour ago. She begged me to let them be together. I had laid the truth bare. Now it was up to Clara. If she had any of the fighting spirit I remembered from my first life, she would seize this chance. She didn't disappoint me. Under the weight of everyone's horrified stares, Clara stumbled forward and fell to her knees in front of Leo's parents, her hands clasped in supplication. "Uncle Charles, Aunt Eleanor, it's true," she confessed, her voice breaking. "Leo and I, we love each other. The baby, it's his." Before the Hazes could process this, Leo shot to his feet, his face a mask of panic and betrayal. That's impossible. I've always been careful. How could you be pregnant? His frantic denial was all the confirmation anyone needed. Leo, I don't know how it happened. Clara cried, scrambling to defend herself. But you told me you never loved Lila. You said she was cold and boring, that you'd break off the engagement to be with me. Why are you denying it now? Shut up. Leo roared, his own carefully constructed world crumbling around him. He lashed out, the sound of his palm connecting with her cheek a sharp, sickening crack in the quiet room. The violence broke the paralysis that had gripped everyone. You stupid boy. Charles Hayes bellowed and drove his foot into his son's stomach, sending him stumbling back. How dare you hit my son? Eleanor shrieked, not in defense of Clara, but in a fury that her precious boy had been assaulted. She turned her wrath on the true target. It's that little slut who seduced him. She's the one to blame. She launched herself at Clara, fingers hooked like talons, yanking viciously at her hair. My father, bellowing incoherently, tried to pull Eleanor away, and within seconds, the living room descended into pure chaos. My mother, who must have rushed home after a call from a panicked servant, arrived just in time to see my father tangled up with Eleanor Hayes. With a cry of fury, she launched herself at him, her nails raking bloody trails down his face. He stumbled back and Clara, now unprotected, was pinned to the floor by a vengeful Eleanor Hayes, who was raining blows upon her. Then Clara let out a weak, guttural moan. My baby. We all froze. A dark, ominous stain was spreading across the fabric of her white dress, seeping down her legs onto the cream-colored carpet. The sight of real blood, the threat of mortal consequence, cut through the rage. Terrified of being implicated in a death, Eleanor scrambled back, her face pale. Someone call an ambulance. Now. The next half hour was a blur of frantic activity. Clara, unconscious or pretending to be, was loaded onto a stretcher and carried out. My father, the Hazes, and a cowed Leo all piled into their cars to follow the ambulance to the hospital. I stood in the middle of the wrecked living room, the scent of spilled tea and violence hanging in the air. I let the cold smile I had been suppressing finally curl my lips. And that's when I felt it, a gaze heavy with fury sweeping over me. I turned my head. My father had turned back at the door, his eyes locking with mine. He had seen the smile. For a fraction of a second, I felt a jolt of the old fear, the instinct to cower. But it was gone as quickly as it came. I was not that girl anymore. I lifted my chin, met his furious stare, and gave him a smile full of pure, unadulterated defiance. His face darkened into a thundercloud. He took a step back toward me, but a sharp honk from the waiting ambulance reminded him of his more pressing drama. He shot me a final venomous look that promised retribution, then turned and climbed in, the vehicle speeding away. The game was far from over. But the first round was mine. The silence they left behind was louder than the chaos. I stood amidst the wreckage of the living room, overturned chairs, a shattered teacup, the dark stain on the carpet a testament to Clara's desperation. A profound sense of calm settled over me. This was the beginning of the end for them and the beginning of everything for me. The front door opened again and my mother, Evelyn, stepped inside. She was still in her tailored executive suit, her hair pulled back in a severe but elegant chignon. Though lines of fatigue framed her eyes, her posture was ramrod straight. She had clearly rushed back, a few strands of hair escaping her updo, a rare sign of disarray. Lila, she said, her voice cool but with an undercurrent of steel. Mrs. Hayes called, saying something catastrophic had happened. What in God's name went on here? In my first life, I would have missed the subtle worry in her eyes, interpreting her composed tone as coldness. I would have screamed, accused her of never being there, of caring more about her company than her daughter. Now I saw the truth. She worked to build a fortress for us, a fortress my father was constantly trying to undermine. My throat tightened. I remembered her in the previous timeline, begging the Hazes to take me back after I had publicly humiliated myself fighting for Leo. I remembered her, defeated and empty-handed, boarding a plane overseas after the divorce, because I had stubbornly chosen to stay with my father. The memory was a physical ache. I didn't answer with words. I crossed the room and wrapped my arms around her, burying my face in the crisp linen of her jacket. Her body stiffened in surprise. Physical affection had always been a rare currency between us, my own teenage rebellion creating a chasm. Then slowly she relaxed, her arms coming up to hold me, her hand patting my back with awkward, genuine tenderness. "Lila? Have you been wronged?" she asked, her voice softer now. "Yes," I whispered, my voice muffled against her shoulder. Then I pulled back and told her everything. I laid out the entire sordid tale. Clara's move into our home, her clandestine relationship with Leo, the pregnancy, and today's explosive confrontation. I presented it not as the hysterical ravings of a jilted girlfriend, but as a clinical report of betrayal and manipulation. "Leo and Clara have been carrying on behind my back for weeks. He's pregnant, Mom." She knelt and begged me to give him up. "And Father," he defended her. "He was going to hit me for exposing her." My mother's face, usually a masterclass in neutral composure, turned to stone. A cold fire ignited in her eyes. "They dared," she breathed, the words laced with venom. "The Hayes and your father's wretched family think they can do this to my daughter? They owe us an explanation today." She grabbed her car keys from the console, her movements sharp and decisive. "We're going to the hospital. Now." She drove with a focused intensity, the city lights blurring past the windows. We didn't speak, but the silence was different now. It was united, a shared front. When we arrived at the private hospital, the air smelled of antiseptic and quiet desperation. A nurse directed us to Clara's room. The scene inside was a pathetic tableau. Clara lay on the white bed, pale and fragile-looking, her eyes closed. My father, David, was hovering over her, his voice a sickeningly gentle murmur. "Clara, are you in pain? Are you thirsty? Tell Uncle anything you need. Don't worry about the baby." It was a level of care he had never, not once, bestowed upon me. My mother didn't bother knocking. She shoved the door open, the sound echoing in the sterile room. Her voice dripped with sarcasm. "How touching. You've never shown Lila a fraction of this concern. Someone might think Clara wasn't your niece, but your illegitimate daughter." It was a throwaway barb, a common insult. But the reaction it provoked was anything but common. My father flinched as if struck. A flash of pure, unadulterated guilt passed over his features before it was consumed by his standard, blustering rage. It was a revelation. A bold, horrifying thought clicked into place in my mind. I looked from my father's panicked face to Clara's on the bed, seeing the similarities I had always refused to see. The shape of the eyes, the curve of the brow. "Evelyn, what poisonous nonsense are you spouting now?" he roared, trying to cover his slip with volume. "Am I?" My mother's gaze was razor-sharp. "Clara dared to steal Lila's fiancé to get herself knocked up, and you defend her? Do you even consider us your family anymore?" "She's young, she made a mistake," he blustered. "And she's family. She's my blood." "She's your blood," my mother repeated slowly, the emphasis heavy with new understanding. The air in the room grew thick enough to choke on. Seeing the argument about to spiral into an irrevocable confrontation, I squeezed my mother's hand. "Mom." She took a sharp breath, mastering her fury. She turned her attention to Charles and Eleanor Hayes, who had been watching the family drama with thinly veiled disgust. "Charles, Eleanor," she began, her tone shifting to that of a CEO addressing a failing business partner. "Given the circumstances, I think the engagement between Lila and Leo is null and void." Eleanor Hayes's face pinched. "Now, Evelyn, let's not be hasty. The boy made a mistake, but he's young. This creature," she waved a dismissive hand at Clara, "means nothing. We'll have the pregnancy terminated and things can go back to the way they were." Before my mother could respond, my father interjected, his voice desperate. "No. That's wasteful. If the child is Leo's, then let Clara take Lila's place. Let them marry." "Absolutely not." Eleanor's eyes bulged. "Lila is going to Ethelgard. She's accomplished. This girl," she sneered, "scraped into a third-rate college and her family are farmers. The Hayes family does not need a daughter-in-law like her. She should get rid of that mistake and go back to where she came from. Let's not let a scheming little nobody ruin the harmony between our families." She looked at my mother for agreement. My mother glanced at my father's desperate, furious face, then patted my hand. Her voice was deceptively calm. "That is not an unreasonable solution." Eleanor sagged with relief. "Good. Then I'll have the doctor schedule the procedure for the morning. As if on cue, Clara's eyes fluttered open. Hearing her fate being decided so coldly, she let out a pathetic whimper and clung to Leo's arm. Leo, please. How can you be so heartless? This is your child. Leo looked trapped, his eyes darting between his mother's imperious glare and Clara's desperate sobs. Get away from my son, you little tramp. Eleanor shrieked, reaching to pry Clara's hands off him. And then the cavalry arrived. The door burst open and Clara's parents, my Uncle Brent and Aunt Sheila, charged in. They were both weathered from a life of manual labor, their faces etched with hardship and fury. Who dares to bully my daughter? Brent roared, his voice echoing in the small room. He saw Eleanor manhandling Clara and shoved the well-dressed woman aside with terrifying ease. You touch my wife. Charles Hayes yelled, stepping forward. What followed was a brutal, undignified brawl. Brent and Sheila, hardened by a life of toil, were far stronger than the soft, spoiled Hayeses. Charles was thrown against a cart of medical supplies, sending instruments clattering to the floor. Eleanor, her designer dress tearing, screeched as Sheila pulled a handful of her perfectly styled hair. Leo jumped in to defend his parents and was promptly backhanded by Brent, sending him spinning into a curtain. It was chaos. It was beautiful. I couldn't help it. A low, genuine laugh escaped my lips. The sound cut through the melee. My father's head snapped toward me. His face was a mask of pure hatred. He stormed across the room, shoving a nurse out of the way. Lila, this is all your fault. You and your vicious mouth. He raised his hand and this time there was no dodging. My mother moved to shield me but he was too fast, his rage too blinding. But the blow never landed. A hand shot out, catching my father's wrist in a grip so firm I could see the bones whitening under the skin. I followed the arm up to a face that was both unfamiliar and searingly familiar. Sharp, angular features, a jawline that could cut glass, and eyes the color of a stormy sea, burning with a dangerous, predatory intensity. A fresh cut marred his eyebrow and his lip was split, but it only added to his wild, untamed allure. It was Cale. Cale Thorne. My high school classmate. In my previous life I'd met him only once years after high school. I was being harassed by two men on my way home from a late shift when he pulled up in a sleek, expensive car. A single sharp honk had sent them running. When I'd stammered my thanks, he'd just given me a curt nod and said, "No need." We were classmates. I'd been too embarrassed by my own shabby existence to say more. Now he was here, younger, the rawness of his youth not yet tempered into the formidable man he would become. "And who the hell are you?" my father spat, trying and failing to wrench his arm free. "This is a hospital." Cale's voice was low, a quiet rumble that commanded more attention than my father's shouting ever could. "And that is your daughter." I've never seen a father so determined to see his own child suffer. The sheer, unexpected audacity of it left my father speechless. He sputtered, his face turning purple. Cale simply held his gaze, his own unwavering. Finally, hospital security swarmed in, pulling the brawling adults apart and forcing Cale to release my father's arm. My father, seething, was dragged away by the guards, his promises of vengeance fading down the hall. I turned to thank Cale, but he was already walking away, his solitary figure disappearing around a corner, leaving behind the scent of ozone and rebellion. Half an hour later, a tense truce was brokered. The Hayeses, their clothes torn and dignity in tatters, were negotiating with Clara's parents. My father stood apart, fuming. "The pregnancy will be terminated," Charles Hayes stated, his voice brittle. "We will provide compensation." "Compensation?" Brentmore scoffed. "You're talking about a life." 500,000, Charles cut him off. "That's my final offer." I saw the calculation in Brent and Sheila's eyes. It was more money than they'd ever seen. They nodded, greed overcoming outrage. On the bed, Clara, hearing her child's fate sealed for cash, let out a wail and fainted, or performed a convincing imitation. As the Moores were led out to discuss the financial arrangements, Eleanor Hayes, looking exhausted and defeated, approached my mother. "Evelyn, once this situation is resolved, surely we can revisit the engagement? Leo is a good boy, he just got led astray." My mother's smile was icy. "That will depend entirely on Leo's future conduct. And Lila's feelings. Of course. He won't step a foot out of line again, I promise." Eleanor dragged a shell-shocked Leo over. He muttered a half-hearted agreement, but his eyes kept drifting to Clara's still form. In the car on the way home, my mother broke the silence. Lila, what are your thoughts now? On marrying Leo? The question was a test. In my past life I would have wept and pleaded for him. Marry that trash? I said, the disgust clear in my voice. Never. The thought of him makes me sick. I saw the tension ease from my mother's shoulders. Then what do you want to do? I want the engagement broken publicly and permanently. But if Clara gets the abortion, the Hayeses will just cling to me again, hoping to salvage their reputation through my acceptance letter. My mother smiled, a genuine, cunning smile. Don't worry. Leave it to me. As soon as we got home, she called Eleanor Hayes. Has the procedure been scheduled? Not yet. Eleanor's weary voice came through the speakerphone. The doctor wants to check her vitals in the morning. The girl is unstable. Don't let her play you, Eleanor, my mother said coolly. A girl who would seduce her cousin's fiancé has the morals of an alley cat. It's not as if Leo can't have other children. Once he and Lila are married, they can have a dozen. She ended the call and looked at me. Leo is their only child. Charles has a low sperm count. It was a miracle they had Leo at all. Eleanor will now be thinking about bloodlines, about securing the heir. She may very well decide to keep that baby, no matter how much she despises Clara. My respect for my mother grew exponentially. So if Clara has the baby, the Hayeses will be too ashamed to pressure you, and they'll never truly accept Clara. Precisely. She reached out and tapped my nose lightly. You're learning. That night I gave the order I'd been dreaming of. I gathered the household staff. Pack every single one of Clara's belongings. I want it all out of this house by morning. Clean her room from top to bottom. They hesitated, looking toward my father's empty study. My mother is the sole owner of this property, I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. You will do as I say. As they scurried to obey, I felt a weight lift. I was reclaiming my space, my life. I moved my things out of the attic and back into my old room, the room that had been stolen from me twice over. I was done with shadows. I was stepping back into the light. The next morning the house felt different. Lighter. The oppressive presence of Clara and her things was gone. Sunlight streamed into my old bedroom, and for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I felt a sense of peace within these walls. It was short-lived. My mother had left early to finalize preparations for my graduation gala, an event I knew she intended to use as a stage for a major announcement. I was preparing to leave myself, to run an errand that had become a pressing necessity, when my father returned. He walked in as if he still owned the place, his face a mosaic of purple bruises and white bandages. His eyes, when they found me, were like shards of ice. Your cousin is lying in a hospital bed, broken, and you're dressing up for a party? He sneered, his voice a low growl. I met his gaze in the hallway mirror as I slipped on a jacket. If she's so broken, why are you here drinking coffee instead of holding her hand? Shouldn't you be by her side, uncle? The sarcasm in the final word made him flinch. His hand clenched around his mug. I was there all night. I'm exhausted. How noble, I said flatly, turning to face him. Your concern for her is truly touching. It almost makes one forget you have a daughter of your own. His temper, always on a hair trigger, exploded. This is all because of you. If you had been a better girlfriend, if you had known how to keep a man's interest, none of this would have happened. Why can't you be more like Clara? She knows how to be soft, how to care for a person. The words were a familiar refrain from my first life, a toxic mantra that had eroded my self-worth. Now they just sounded pathetic. She knows how to care for a person? I repeated, a cold smile touching my lips. Is that what you call seducing her cousin's fiancé? I suppose we have different definitions of care. I walked towards the door, done with the conversation. Lila, he barked. When you see Clara at the hospital, you will apologize. You will smooth things over. I didn't bother to reply. I just closed the door behind me, the solid thud a period at the end of our sentence. My destination was the hospital, but not to see Clara. I had a different mission. The suspicion that had taken root yesterday had grown into a gnawing certainty. I needed proof. On the way, I detoured to the hotel where my celebration would be held, meeting my mother to approve the final details. Her efficiency was breathtaking. Everything was perfect. As I was leaving, I sent a text message. A simple invitation to the party. I hesitated over Cale Thorne's name. We weren't friends. We were barely acquaintances. But he had stepped into my chaos without a second thought. I typed the message, polite and formal, and hit send before I could overthink it. The near-instantaneous reply was a single word. Yes. A strange flutter of anticipation, entirely separate from my plans for revenge, stirred in my chest. I pushed it down. Focus. At the hospital, I made my way to Clara's private room. The door was ajar. I paused outside, listening to the voices within. So clever are Clara, Aunt Sheila was cooing. Soon you'll be Mrs. Leo Hayes. Just you wait. That Lila, all book smarts and no common sense, Uncle Brent chimed in, his voice gruff with smug satisfaction. Can't even keep a man. When you're married, make sure your Uncle David gives you a proper dowry. He owes us. I pushed the door open. Planning my father's finances for him? How ambitious. The three of them froze. Clara was sitting up in bed, color back in her cheeks, looking far from broken. Her expression shifted from shock to a familiar, venomous resentment. Lila, my uncle said, trying to regain his composure. Things have gone too far. Even if you marry Leo, you'll only have an empty shell. His heart belongs to Clara. Aunt Sheila immediately switched tactics, her face crumpling into a mask of sorrow. Lila, you've had everything since you were a child. Everything. Clara has had nothing. Can't you find it in your heart to be merciful? Can't you let her have this one thing? Clara began to cry, the tears flowing on command. Lila, for the sake of our kinship, please forgive me. They were a perfect trio of manipulation. The bully, the beggar, and the victim. It might have worked on the old Lila. Forgive you. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. For seducing my fiancé and carrying his child? I must have been cursed in a past life to be related to people like you. Let me make this clear. I will never willingly cancel my engagement with Leo. I saw the hope flare in Clara's eyes before I extinguished it. She can have the baby. And when it's born, it will call me mother. I will raise it as my own. The Hayes family will ensure it. You, I said, looking at each of them, will be nothing but a shameful secret. At best, the child might call Clara, Aunt. You will never be able to show your faces in polite society again. Their faces paled, their smugness replaced by pure horror. I had taken their dream of wealth and status and twisted it into a nightmare of humiliation. Just then a nurse's aide entered with a lunch tray. She was flustered, and as she set the tray down she fumbled, sending a porcelain plate shattering to the floor. I'm so sorry. So sorry, she stammered, bending to gather the sharp pieces, her hands shaking. Let me help you, I said, kneeling down. As I collected the shards, I glanced at her face. And I froze. She was older, lines of hardship etched deeply around her eyes and mouth, but the resemblance was uncanny. The same eyes as Clara. The same curve of the lip. This was the woman who came to clean our house twice a week. A woman my father had always insisted on hiring. My heart hammered against my ribs. The suspicion was no longer a theory. It was a living, breathing fact staring me in the face. It's fine, no harm done, I said softly, placing the pieces I'd gathered into her dustpan. As I stood, I pretended to steady myself on her shoulder, my fingers deftly plucking a single dark hair from her head. She was too flustered to notice. I slipped the hair into my pocket just as Leo appeared in the doorway. He looked strangely exhilarated. Lila, you're amazing, he said, his voice earnest. You don't mind Clara having the baby? You'd even be its mother? Don't worry, I'll make it up to you. I'll be the best husband. He had heard everything I'd said, and he'd interpreted my cruel taunt as a genuine offer. The sheer stupidity of it was breathtaking. What about Clara? I asked loudly for the benefit of the room. Leo waved a dismissive hand. Once the baby is born, we'll give her some money and she can go. A sharp, pained gasp came from the hospital bed. Clara's eyes rolled back in her head, and she slumped against the pillows, either truly fainting or executing a flawless dramatic exit. I looked at Leo, at his pathetically hopeful face. What I said was to hurt her, Leo. There is nothing left between us. Go home and tell your parents to stop telling people I'm your future wife. It's disgusting. I didn't wait for his response. I walked out, the strand of the housekeeper's hair feeling like a live wire in my pocket. My next stop was a discreet private DNA testing lab. I submitted the housekeeper's hair, along with a sample of my father's I had retrieved from his hairbrush this morning, and one from Clara, plucked from a hairbrush left on her bedside table. The truth was now out of my hands, on its way to being quantified by science. The day of my graduation gala arrived. As I was leaving, my father, sulking on the sofa, delivered his final command. "Remember to visit your cousin." I ignored him, stepping out into the evening air. The party was a whirlwind of light, music, and congratulatory smiles. My grandparents were there, their presence a silent show of support for my mother and me. They were stiff with my father, their disapproval a tangible force. And then I saw him. Cale Thorne. He stood near the entrance, looking out of place in his simple dark clothes amidst the sea of tailored suits and glittering gowns. Yet he commanded the space, his quiet intensity drawing glances from everyone, especially my female classmates. "You came," I said, walking up to him. His stormy eyes found mine. "You invited me." I led him to a table, and as he sat, a hush fell over the group of my chattering friends. One of them leaned over to me, whispering, "Lila, how did you get Cale Thorne to come? He never goes to these things." I just smiled. The evening proceeded with the usual rounds of toasts and pleasantries. When we reached the Hayes' table, my mother gracefully took the microphone that had been set up for speeches. "Friends, family," she began, her voice clear and confident. "We are here to celebrate Lila's incredible achievement. As she embarks on this new journey at Ethelgard, it also feels like the right time to announce that the childhood understanding between her and Leo Hayes has been amicably dissolved. They are both young with bright, separate futures ahead." It was a masterful, face-saving way to put it. The guests, all savvy social players, nodded and smiled, understanding the unspoken truth. But I wasn't in a face-saving mood. As I stepped away from the table, I deliberately caught my heel on the leg of a chair. I stumbled forward, right toward where Clara was sitting with her parents, who had been grudgingly invited for appearance's sake. Just as I was about to crash into her, a strong arm wrapped around my waist, pulling me back firmly against a solid chest. He steadied me. "All right," he murmured, his voice a low vibration against my back. "Yes. Thank you," I said, my heart pounding from the proximity. Clara, however, saw her opportunity. She leapt to her feet, clutching her stomach dramatically. "She did that on purpose," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. The music faltered. Every eye in the room turned to us. "She can't stand that I'm carrying Leo's child. She tried to make me lose the baby." The gasps were audible. The secret was out, screamed to the entire room. Eleanor Hayes' face went white with fury. "How dare you?" she hissed at Clara. "You lying little. If you don't believe the child is Leo's, we can always do a DNA test after it's born," I interjected coolly. "But if you're lying, Clara, I'll make sure you regret it." The Hayes looked ready to murder someone. My mother, with a sharp nod, summoned security. Within moments, the Hayes and Moore families were being unceremoniously escorted from the ballroom, their shouts and protests fading into the night. The party continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. I was now the object of sympathy, the wronged heiress. And my father, across the room, was staring at me with a look of such pure, undiluted hatred that I knew without a doubt the final battle was coming. And I was ready for it. The gala ended not with a bang, but with a suffocating silence in the car ride home. My mother's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, her profile a marble mask of controlled fury. The public unraveling of our family's secrets, though orchestrated by me, was still a deep humiliation for her, a woman who had built her life on control and discretion. We arrived home to find the lights blazing. My father was waiting for us, a storm contained within the sterile walls of our foyer. He didn't shout. The quiet was more terrifying. "You," he seethed, his voice a low, venomous whisper aimed directly at me. "You vicious, calculating little bitch. You humiliated us all. You drove Clara to the brink, and now you've made us a laughingstock." My mother's voice cut through the tension like a whip. She stepped in front of me, a lioness shielding her cub. "You dare to speak of humiliation, David? You who defended the girl who betrayed your own daughter. You whose family brawled like animals in a public hospital. The only thing Lila did was tell the truth you were all so desperate to hide." "The truth?" he roared, finally losing the last shred of his control. "She twisted everything. She provoked Clara. Evelyn, you have always coddled her, Let her think she's better than everyone. This is your fault. He took a menacing step forward. The guards my mother employed, who had been hovering in the periphery, immediately moved to form a protective circle around us. Try touching her again, my mother said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. See what happens. His eyes bulged, darting between the stoic guards and my mother's unyielding face. He was a man who had always ruled through intimidation, and he was finally realizing his power was an illusion. Fine, he spat, the word laced with a final chilling resolve. You want to side with her? Then we're done. I want a divorce. The words hung in the air. I felt a surge of triumph so potent it made me dizzy. This was it. The moment I had been pushing for. My mother didn't flinch. I've already had the papers drawn up. His arrogance faltered for a second, shocked that she wasn't begging him to stay. Then his greed took over. Then we split everything. 50-50. The company, the assets, everything. I couldn't stay silent. 50-50? What? Your sweat. Your intelligence. You've contributed nothing but debt and disgrace. This company, this house, it was all built by Mom and her family. The law doesn't care about your childish opinions, he sneered at me. The law, my mother interjected, her tone icy and professional, cares about prenuptial agreements and proof of contribution. My lawyers will be in touch. Now get out of my sight. For a moment I thought he would truly erupt into violence. But the guards took a synchronized step forward and he saw the futility of it. With a final hate-filled glare that promised a war, he turned and stomped upstairs, the sound of his departure like a death knell for their marriage. My mother's shoulders slumped the moment he was out of view. The iron-willed Seo was gone, replaced by a weary, heartbroken woman. Mom, I whispered, going to her. He squeezed my hand. It's all right, Lila. It was a long time coming. She took a deep, shuddering breath. I need to make some calls. Go to bed. We'll talk in the morning. But I couldn't sleep. I waited until the house was quiet, then I slipped into her room. She wasn't sleeping either. She was sitting by the window holding a faded photograph. It was their wedding photo. She stared at it for a long time, at the young, hopeful faces of two people who had no idea of the bitterness to come. Then with a sudden, decisive movement she tore it in half, then into quarters, letting the pieces flutter into the trash can. She saw me standing in the doorway and didn't seem surprised. She held out her hand and I went to her, letting her pull me into a tight embrace. When I married your father, she said, her voice soft with memory, my parents warned me. They said he was weak, that he was only after the family's influence. But I was young. I was fooled by his charm, by the way he made me feel seen. I thought I could fix him. She let out a bitter laugh. What a fool I was. Everyone makes mistakes, Mom, I said, my face buried in her robe. What matters is that we correct them. And without him you wouldn't have me, right? I added, trying to lighten the heavy mood. She pulled back, cupping my face in her hands. Her eyes were clear and resolute. Lila, if I divorce him, truly divorce him, can you accept that? Yes, I said without a moment's hesitation. I'll be with you. My firm answer seemed to be the final piece of confirmation she needed. A weight lifted from her and the confident woman I knew returned. After we deal with the fallout from the party, I'll have him served. I hugged her tightly, staying with her until her breathing evened out in sleep. As I left, I noticed a single short strand of his dark hair on her pillow. I carefully picked it up. The final piece of my puzzle was in hand. The next morning I went to the DNA lab. I submitted my father's hair alongside the samples from Clara and the housekeeper. The truth was now a matter of science, no longer just a gut feeling. A few days later, the results arrived in a plain, unassuming envelope. My hands were steady as I opened it. I skimmed the technical jargon, my eyes finding the only lines that mattered. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. Conclusion: David Vance is the biological father of Clara Moore. Relationship: the submitted sample from Anya Petrova, the housekeeper, is the biological mother of Clara Moore. There was, in black and white, the serpent's truth. Claire wasn't just my cousin. He was my half-sister. My father had not only betrayed my mother with the housekeeper, but he had foisted his illegitimate child upon us, letting her live in our home, eat our food and steal what she could, all under the guise of family charity. The anger that rose in me was cold and clean. This was no longer just about a stolen boyfriend or a ruined party. This was a betrayal that spanned decades. I took the report straight to my mother. She was in her home office already working, the divorce papers sitting in a folder on her desk. She looked up as I entered, and her smile faded when she saw my expression. "What is it, Lila?" I placed the DNA report on the desk in front of her. She picked it up, her eyes scanning the page. I watched the color drain from her face, her composure cracking like fine porcelain. Her hand trembled slightly, but her voice was dangerously calm when she spoke. "That bastard." The word was a condemnation. All these years. The favoritism. The way he looked at her. I thought it was just his twisted family loyalty. But this. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a pain so deep it stole my breath. "I'm so sorry, Lila. I brought that man into your life." "This is not your fault," I said fiercely. "It's his. And now we have the weapon to end him." She nodded, the CEO reasserting herself. She picked up her phone. "Mother? Dad? I need you to come over. And bring Robert. Right now." My maternal grandparents and my uncle Robert, a man built like a linebacker with a fierce protective streak, arrived within the hour. My mother handed them the report without a word. The reaction was volcanic. My grandfather, a stoic man, cursed so violently it made me jump. My grandmother burst into tears of rage. But it was Uncle Robert who was the most dangerous. He said nothing. He just turned, his face a thundercloud, and marched out of the office. We heard the sounds of a struggle from upstairs. Shouting, a crash, my father's terrified yelps. My mother didn't flinch. She just listened, a grim satisfaction on her face. After a few minutes, Robert came back downstairs, dusting off his hands. My father was not with him. "He'll live," Robert grunted. "But he won't be sitting comfortably for a while." He then took the divorce papers and went back upstairs. We heard my father's weak, protesting voice, then silence. Robert returned, the papers signed. "He wasn't feeling cooperative," Robert said, his voice a low growl. I reminded him that without his signature he wouldn't be facing just a divorce, but a lawsuit for adultery and fraud that would land him in prison, and that I would personally ensure every last one of his mooching relatives regretted the day they were born. He saw reason. It was over. Just like that. My parents' marriage, a 2-decade-long farce, was dissolved with a few strokes of a pen and a well-placed threat. My father was thrown out of the house that afternoon with nothing but the clothes on his back and a small, discreetly provided sum of money, my mother's final act of a mercy he did not deserve. I watched from an upstairs window as he limped down the driveway, a broken, pathetic figure. I felt nothing. No pity, no triumph. Just a vast, empty silence. My grandparents, their hearts breaking for their daughter, insisted we come to live with them. The house, my mother decided, was cursed. She put it on the market immediately, selling it for far less than it was worth. A symbolic cleansing. In their grand, warm home, surrounded by family who genuinely loved us, I felt a sense of peace I had never known. The fortress my mother had built was not made of stone and money, but of loyalty and love. And we were finally, truly safe within its walls. Life at my grandparents' estate was a different world. The air was lighter, filled with the scent of my grandmother's baking and the sound of genuine laughter instead of tense silence. For the first time, I experienced what a functional family felt like. My mother, freed from the constant drain of my father's toxicity, began to bloom again. The tight lines around her eyes softened. She took a few weeks off work and we spent the time together. Not doing anything grand, just talking, walking through the gardens, rebuilding the connection that had been frayed for years. One afternoon she found me reading on the sun porch. "Lila," she said, sitting beside me. "With all the garbage now taken out, what are your thoughts for the future? Beyond Ethelgard." I closed my book. "I want to intern at the company this summer. I want to start learning the business. Earning money, building something real. That's what matters now. I don't want to just be the heiress. I want to be your successor." Her smile was brilliant, full of pride and relief. "I was hoping you'd say that. I'll have my assistant set everything up. You'll start at the bottom, of course. You need to learn it all." It was the perfect distraction. While I immersed myself in corporate strategy and market analyses, the outside world continued to buzz with the scandal of the Fiancés and the Hazes. I didn't have to seek out the information. It found its way to me through hushed conversations and gleeful society blog posts. After the DNA results had been strategically leaked, a move I suspected was my Uncle Robert's doing, the Moore family had descended into civil war. Clara, upon learning the housekeeper was her real mother, had reportedly flown into a rage, screaming that she came from shameless trash. Any hope she had of leveraging her Vance blood evaporated. Desperate and cornered, she had tried to use the one card she had left, the baby. But without the leverage of being the wronged niece, her power was gone. In a fit of pique, she had marched into a clinic and terminated the pregnancy, believing it would somehow punish Leo and force him to choose her. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. Without the potential heir, the Hayes had zero reason to tolerate her. Leo, freed from the responsibility of fatherhood and seeing Clara's true volatile nature, dropped her completely. The Hayes family, already reeling from the social and financial fallout of the scandals, lost partnerships, a plunging stock price, wanted nothing more to do with any of them. As for my father, David Vance, his downfall was swift and brutal. The private savings he had hidden from my mother were quickly discovered and drained by his parasitic brothers, who lured him into high-stakes gambling. Within a month he was millions in debt, his name mud, and his family, realizing he was a tapped-out resource, threw him out onto the street. A neighbor from our old house later told me a shabby, disheveled man had been seen wandering the area, looking for my mother and me. But the house was sold and we were gone. He was a ghost, erased from our world. Hearing about his misery, I felt a distant, clinical satisfaction. The man who had caused us so much pain was now living it. But the fiery, vengeful hatred was gone. It had burned out, leaving behind only cold ash. He was no longer my concern. A week before I was due to start my internship, I was shopping for professional attire when I ran into Leo Hayes. Or rather, he ambushed me, stepping out from behind a clothing rack as I left a boutique. "Lila," he said, his voice pleading. He looked thinner, shadows under his eyes. "I've ended it with Clara. For good. It's over. We have history. We grew up together. Can't you find it in your heart to give me another chance?" I looked at him, truly looked at him. The charming smile seemed weak, the confident posture was a slouch. He was a boy playing at being a man, and the game was over. In another life his plea might have worked. Now it was just pathetic. "You're right, Leo," I said, my voice flat. "We did grow up together. And that's the only reason I'm being civil. But there is no us. There never really was. It was always just an arrangement. And I am no longer available for arrangement." The flicker of genuine hurt in his eyes was almost amusing. Some people only want what they can't have. "I'm sorry," I said, not feeling sorry at all. I stepped around him and walked away, not looking back. The past was a country I had no intention of revisiting. My internship began and I threw myself into it. I was just another junior analyst, and my mother made sure I received no special treatment. I fetched coffee, sorted files, and sat in on meetings, absorbing everything. It was grueling, but it was real. I was building my own foundation brick by brick. It was during this time that I received an unexpected email. The sender was k.thorne@ethelgard.edu. The subject line was simple: course registration. My heart did a funny little jump. I opened it. "Lila, I saw you're registered for Professor Irwin's Economics 101 and Davies Strategic Management. I'm in those sections as well. The reading list is attached if you don't have it yet." It wasn't a friendly email. It was starkly practical. But he had noticed. He had sought out my schedule. And he had reached out. I stared at the screen for a long moment, a slow smile spreading across my face. I typed a reply. "Thank you. I appreciate it. See you in class. Lila." It was a small thing, a thread. But as I looked out the window of my temporary office, toward the gleaming skyline that represented my future, I realized that for the first time, the threads in my life were not being pulled by others. I was holding the loom. And I was ready to weave something entirely new. The campus of Ethelgard University was a world of Gothic spires and gleaming modern libraries, a place humming with an intellectual energy I could almost taste. It was my sanctuary, my proving ground, a world away from the gilded cage of my old life. Here I wasn't David Vance's daughter or Evelyn Vance's heir. I was just Lila, the freshman with a frighteningly focused drive. I moved into my single dorm room, a sparse but peaceful space that was entirely my own. My mother had helped me settle in, her pride a tangible thing. "Remember to actually sleep," she chided gently before leaving. And call me. Not just about business. I'd hugged her, a real easy hug. I will, Mom. The first week was a whirlwind of orientation and syllabus shock. I was navigating the labyrinthine corridors of the economics building when a low voice spoke from behind me. You're going the wrong way. Irwin's lecture hall is in the west wing. I turned. Cale Thorne stood there, a worn leather satchel slung over one shoulder. He looked more at home here than he had at the gala, the wildness in his eyes tempered by a sharp intelligence. The cut on his brow had healed into a faint silver line. Cale. Thanks. He fell into step beside me, his presence both unsettling and steadying. The campus map is a lie designed to weed out the unworthy. A dry, almost smile touched his lips. It transformed his face, softening its harsh angles. I found myself smiling back. Noted. We didn't speak again until we were seated next to each other in the vast amphitheater-style lecture hall. Professor Irwin was a legend, a brutal intellectual who prized cold, hard logic. That first lecture was a gauntlet thrown down, a complex dismantling of basic economic principles that left most of the class looking shell-shocked. As we filed out, a boy behind me groaned. I didn't understand a single thing after the first 5 minutes. Cale glanced at me, a question in his eyes. The flaw in his third postulate was in the assumption of perfect information, I said quietly, thinking aloud. He set it up to fail, to show us how fragile our foundational models are. Cale nodded, a spark of respect in his gaze. He's testing who's actually thinking and who's just memorizing. This became our unspoken routine. We didn't make plans to meet, but we always ended up sitting together. Our conversations were sparse, built around Irwin's lectures and Davy's case studies. He was fiercely, intimidatingly bright, cutting through academic pretension with a pragmatic, almost ruthless clarity. He never asked about my family or the scandal. He seemed to regard me solely based on the quality of my arguments, and I found I craved that judgment more than any other. Meanwhile, I kept my head down and worked. I spent my evenings in the library, often finding Cale already there, buried in a corral, surrounded by texts on corporate finance and political theory. We'd study in a comfortable, focused silence, the only sound the turning of pages and the scratch of my pen. One rainy Thursday, I was wrestling with a particularly dense case study on market failure when he slid a book across the table. Read Chapter 4. It reframes the problem. The book was The Architecture of Collapse, a text not on our syllabus. I took it, our fingers brushing. A jolt, small but undeniable, passed between us. Thank you. He just gave a curt nod and returned to his work. This was the new world I was building. Brick by brick, fact by fact. It was challenging, it was exhausting, and it was utterly mine. The past, however, has a way of leaking through the cracks. I was leaving the library one evening when my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, but the area code was from my hometown. A cold dread settled in my stomach. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text came through. "Pal, it's Claire. I know you don't want to talk to me. I need to see you. Please. It's about your father." I stared at the screen, my calm shattering. Your father. Not Uncle David. The DNA results had rewritten our history, and she was finally acknowledging it. I felt a surge of nausea. I had no desire to see her, to be pulled back into their drama. I started to type a refusal. Then another text arrived. A photo. It was a screenshot of a news article from a local tabloid. The headline was brutal. From CO2 Street. David Vance's spectacular fall from grace. The photo beneath it was grainy but unmistakable. It was my father sitting on a park bench, his clothes rumpled, his head in his hands. He looked decades older. My thumb hovered over the delete button. I should block the number. I should walk away and never look back. That was the plan. But a cold, hard knot of curiosity tightened in my chest. I needed to see this through. I needed to see the final act of their tragedy, not for closure but for confirmation. I needed to witness the ashes. I texted back. Where? She named a cheap chain coffee shop near the bus station, a place far from the polished world of the university. I told Cale I had to run an errand. He took one look at my face and didn't ask questions, just said, "Do you want me to come?" The offer, simple and direct, surprised me. This was my mess. But the thought of facing Clara alone suddenly felt exhausting. "Yes," I heard myself say. "But just Wait outside. He nodded. The coffee shop smelled of stale grounds and disinfectant. Claire was already there, huddled in a booth in the back. She was a ghost of the girl who had knelt on my living room floor. Her hair was lank, her face pale and drawn without its usual makeup. The calculated vulnerability was gone, replaced by a genuine, desperate exhaustion. She looked up as I approached, her eyes widening when she saw I wasn't alone. Cale had taken a seat at the counter, his back to us, a silent, formidable sentinel. "Lila," she whispered. I slid into the booth opposite her, not taking off my jacket. "You have 5 minutes." "He's sick," she blurted out, her voice trembling. David. It's his liver. The doctors say it's from the drinking. He has no money, no insurance. My parents, they've washed their hands of him. They blame him for everything." I said nothing. I just watched her, my face a mask. "He's asking for you," she pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. These at least seemed real. "He's sorry, Lila. He knows he was wrong. He just wants to see you before he dies?" I finished for her, my voice cold. "Let me be very clear, Clara. David Vance ceased to be my father the moment he chose you over me, long before I knew you were his daughter. His illness, his poverty, his regrets, they are not my concern. They are the consequences of his own choices." The tears spilled over. "He's still your blood. How can you be so heartless?" A bitter laugh escaped me. "Heartless? You came into my home, slept with my fiancé, and tried to destroy my future. You don't get to lecture me on heartlessness. You and he made your bed. Now you can lie in it." I stood up, the vinyl seat squeaking in the silence. "Do not contact me again. Either of you." I turned and walked out, my heart hammering against my ribs. I felt Cale fall into step beside me. We walked for 2 blocks in silence, the cool evening air a balm. "Are you okay?" he finally asked. I stopped, looking out at the traffic, the normal people living their normal lives. "I will be," I said, and I realized it was the truth. The encounter hadn't broken me. It had hardened my resolve. That was my cousin. Well, my half-sister, technically. I didn't elaborate. He didn't press. He just listened as I gave him the barest, most clinical outline. The affair, the illegitimate child, the betrayal. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You were right to walk away," he said simply. "Some fires you don't put out. You just make sure you're not standing in the burn zone." His understanding was a profound relief. He didn't offer pity or platitudes. He offered a soldier's perspective. We started walking again, back toward the university gates, the spires of Ethelgard rising before us like a promise. "My mother is coming to town this weekend," I found myself saying. "She wants to take me to dinner. Would you like to come?" It was a risk. An invitation into the one part of my life that was still tangled with the past. Cale looked at me, his stormy eyes searching mine. For a moment, I thought he would refuse, retreat back into his solitary world. He said. And just like that, a new thread was woven into the fabric of my new world. The restaurant was one of my mother's favorites. Elegant, quiet, with a view of the river. I was nervous, a feeling so foreign it was almost amusing. I'd faced down corporate raiders and familial collapse, but the thought of my mother and Cale in the same room tied my stomach in knots. I needn't have worried. Cale arrived exactly on time, dressed in a simple, well-cut dark jacket that made him look less like a rebellious student and more like a young, ruthless Sioux. He shook my mother's hand, his grip firm, his gaze direct. "Mrs. Vance. It's a pleasure to meet you." "Evelyn, please," my mother said, her sharp eyes taking him in with a single, comprehensive glance. I saw the moment her professional assessment shifted to a more personal, curious approval. "Lila has told me you're the only one in her economics class who can keep up." "She sets a high bar," he replied, holding my mother's chair for her before taking his own. The gesture was old-fashioned, natural. It makes the climb worthwhile. The dinner was not what I expected. It wasn't an interrogation. It was a conversation. Cale was quiet, but when he spoke, it was with a depth and perception that commanded attention. He and my mother discussed global market trends, the ethics of hostile takeovers, the future of sustainable energy. He didn't try to impress her. He engaged with her as an equal. I mostly listened, watching this new dynamic unfold. My mother, the brilliant strategist, was clearly intrigued. She was seeing what I saw, Not a boy from the wrong side of the tracks but a force of nature in the making. Over dessert the conversation turned more personal. "And your family, Kale?" my mother asked, her tone gentle but probing. "What do they do?" Kale's expression didn't change, but a subtle tension entered his shoulders. "My mother passed away when I was young. My father is not in the picture. I was raised by my grandfather. He was a mechanic. He taught me that everything, no matter how complex, can be understood if you're willing to get your hands dirty and look at its component parts." It was the most he had ever revealed about himself. The raw honesty of it silenced both my mother and me. There was no self-pity in his voice, only a stark, unvarnished fact. My mother's face softened. "A valuable philosophy. It seems he taught you well." Later, as we said our goodbyes outside the restaurant, my mother pulled me into a quick hug. "He's formidable, Lila," she whispered in my ear. "Be careful. And be kind." She got into her car, leaving Kale and me standing on the sidewalk under the amber glow of the streetlights. The river flowed dark and silent beside us. "She's a lot," I said, feeling the need to explain. "She's remarkable," Kale corrected, his gaze following the taillights of her car. "She built an empire. She survived a war in her own home. You have her strength." His words warmed me from the inside. "Thank you for coming." He turned to face me, the city lights reflected in his eyes. "Lila, I don't do this. Friends. Relationships. They're complications. Liabilities." My heart sank. This was the brush-off. I'd misread everything. "I understand." "No," he said, taking a step closer. "You don't. I'm telling you this because you're not a complication. You're a clarity I didn't know I was looking for. From the first moment I saw you smiling in the middle of that wrecked living room, I knew you were different. You weren't a victim. You were an architect." The air left my lungs. He had seen me. Truly seen me. "I don't know what this is," he continued, his voice low and intense. "But I know I want to find out. On my own terms. On ours." He wasn't offering me a fairy tale. He was offering a partnership. A shared journey of two people who understood the price of survival and the value of strength. "On our terms," I agreed. He didn't try to kiss me. He simply reached out and took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. It was a simple gesture, but it felt more significant than any kiss, any declaration. It was a pact. We walked back to campus, hand in hand, the silence between us now filled with 1,000 unspoken understandings. The past was a closed book. The future was a blank page. And for the first time I was no longer just a character in someone else's story, reacting to their plots and schemes. I was the author. Kale was my first and most trusted reader. When we reached the path that split toward our respective dorms, he stopped. "I'll see you in Erwin's class," he said. "You will," I replied. He squeezed my hand once, then released it and walked away, his solitary figure soon swallowed by the shadows between the ancient buildings. I stood there for a long time, the ghost of his touch still warm on my skin. I looked up at the stars, sharp and clear in the cold night sky. I thought of my mother building her company. I thought of Kale building his life from nothing. I thought of the schematics on my desk, the first inklings of my own business plan. I was no longer the girl who had died in a factory. I was no longer the girl who had fought for a boy's affections. I was Lila Vance, heir to an empire, student of Ethelgard and architect of my own fate. The path ahead was mine to design. And I was just getting started. The end.